example, the Interventionist show, a lot of people that were in the show got jobs. That is, you can help people, when you mention infrastructures, like the production of, you legitimate practices that can produce worlds of networks that can self-replicate themselves. And I do think it's interesting to think about social production as legitimate infrastructure production. I think it's a very useful word. And that's what we can, and it is about jobs, but it's also about legitimating ideas and a form of practice. I have a resistance sometimes to ideas of interventions in major museums. A lot of my political friends hate the museum, but lately I've been in the mood of the take back the museum, right? I mean, it's either give up on the art world or really go at it again. And I think we all struggle with that. But like, do we want to? I almost want to do a panel called "Have we given up on the art world?" Right? Because we all wrestle with that, have we? But if we want to retake it, then we got to reframe the debate dramatically. And I don't know, it's just something. Because you can get jobs through it, and we can live, and we can like actually have a life in it that's like productive, and we can shape it. I think that's a huge importance in terms of making culture happen, is helping people sustain their practice.
Well, in terms of framing, I mean, when we thought about doing this intervention, we really thought we would perform across the street while the general members were lining up, because we knew there would be a really big crowd. So we actually hadn't anticipated actually being able to get into the space of the museum itself. But because there was so much commotion and fanfare, we just sort of slipped in the door. Didn't seem odd that we were dressed kind of funny. And then because you're allowed to take photographs in the lobby, we thought, okay, well, we'll just perform in the lobby. But it was so loud because of all the experimental music and the dry ice and all. So that's why we did the first version of the performance in the women's bathroom, so that we could get sound. And then we just thought that we would be bold and just sneak up to the galleries, putting the camcorder in the kimono. And we were performing in front of the sculptures, and the gallery guards, I mean, no one could actually figure out if we were hired or not, including the gallery guards who went to get the upper administration to ask if we were on payroll. And so, I mean, it's interesting because the success of the piece depended on the way that openings themselves have become such spectacular and social events. And that was something we couldn't anticipate how it had worked out. At the same time, you know, we may have looked like hired entertainment. And so then again, yeah, does it radically alter the frame through which one could see that as a kind of critique?
Well, I mean, I think it's so interesting to me to be like on this panel, and it's fantastic to be able to have a good dialogue. But it's like I was sitting here thinking, like, are we meant to come up? Are we meant to sort of arrive at some conclusions and answers? And all of it seems so project to project, show to show. You know, some things are good in the institution, some things are not. I mean, and even like how we're looking at some of these texts, like you can look at Claire Bishop's. Antagonism and relational aesthetics, and it's like when I read that, there were lots of things that I really related to in that. There was a lot of stuff that I thought was crap, you know, and I think it's like sometimes I think maybe because there's this institutionalization or trendiness of this kind of work, I don't know what the word is, that we're trying to sort of wrap things up, say what it is. How do we quantify this? How do we assess whether it's good? And to me, questions like that suggest that it's almost like there's one way or there's one simple answer, and it seems like, you know, that's problematic.
Okay, and sort of also, I suppose, going with partly that sentiment, thinking about Larry's question of what is the usefulness of framing certain kinds of practices under the category art. Part of why I think it's difficult to answer that is what art means is different in different contexts. And I'm always interested in the generating structure that produces an artwork. I think it's very different for a community center to ask an artist to do something or for a community center to get a grant to do something that they want to do, for an individual artist to be commissioned to do as a kind of person for hire to do a social project versus a locally grown project from people who live in the area where they're intervening. I'm always interested too in the notion of a commission, which is a certain kind of art world orientation. Where is the moment when is one commissioned by a nonprofit to do something? What's the relationship between that and the larger structures by which the nonprofit is funded? Or I'm also interested in moments when where are the places where certain kinds of social practitioners decide to always work together, maybe even decide to always work together, that they decide to form their own nonprofit. I just keep going and going, so it's more and more questions. And so in each of those examples, I think different kinds of hopes for instrumentalizations, hopes for making them happy at their residency, start to come in, as well as different notions about what the art is supposed to do, and varieties of a very asymmetrical and inconsistent playing field for what it means to institutionally support any kind of artwork. Again, it's a sort of case-by-case kind of orientation, but it's sort of what are the questions one asks then in each case. And I do think we can try to think about what those questions might be.
That leads well into my last term, which is mediation. I think that within the span of the art world, there are, as Shannon is saying, so many different institutional contexts, and yet in just about all of them, the artist is going to find themselves involved in a mediated relationship, most traditionally with a curator, but as we saw in Joseph's piece, with what are they called, a webmaster, whoever finally made the decision to pull the plug. In Tina's case, with the PR department, who unwittingly mediated your work into something it wasn't intended to be. So I just want to throw out this question of what you make of this point of intersection, and do you think it's important to focus the practice of interruption and intervention on those nodes of mediation, or on to disregard them and focus on a larger sort of social question? I'm not sure if that's exactly the best way to frame this, but I mean, just sort of supposing that point of mediation is where the rubber meets the road in any cases. That's where power is articulated.
In the world, we gain a better appreciation of projects because it's not really whether or not they're good or bad or who did it, but what happened. Does it allow us to reflect on the world more productively? And clearly that's a part of this kind of neoliberal subjectivity legacy, where we're always focusing on, okay, if you're the artist, but then the curator helps make your work. Who made the work? You're like, Wittgenstein would call that a riddle of language that's kind of silly. It's like, he said language was like tools, and in this case, you'd be putting like toothpaste on a hammer, right? Like, you're just not using language correctly. The better way to look at it is, what is the phenomena that was produced by this situation, and how does it make us understand the world in a more complex manner, as opposed to looking at people and like being like, you're good, you're bad. Lately, I've been really fascinated with art school controversies. There's so many good ones, like the abortion girl up at Yale. But I was thinking, everyone says these projects are bad, and it's true, but, when you get away from that, and you're just like, God, these things are wonderful devices for thinking about what's happening. You become liberated when you don't have to value it at all. And I think that's a similar kind of thing about mediation. If you can stop fetishizing who did what, you can enjoy projects better.
I think a big thing for me, coming from, although places other than just theater, but also, a variety of other non-art spaces. But still, there's something about coming to social practices and then encountering it with people who come from different art forms that the sort of, there's a way that